Earth continues to warm at an alarming pace, according to a new report by the United Nations. The document says the world is on track to warm by nearly 3 degrees Celsius this century. That's almost twice as high as the goal of 1.5 degrees that was set by the Paris Climate Accords. CBC's Darius Madavi has more on what's in that report. Darius, take us through what we're learning tonight.
So this is the annual emissions gap report that is put out every year by the UN. And as you said, this is highlighting that we are currently on track to hit 3 degrees Celsius of warming by the end of this century. Now, if we were to try and meet the 1.5 degree goal that was set out less than 10 years ago in 2015 with the Paris Climate Accords, we would need to reduce our emissions by 22 billion metric tons, over 40% of what we are currently emitting. Now, those cuts would need to be made by 2030, which we are by no means on track to do. Without the most aggressive climate action we've ever seen, we are not going to hit those goals. And even that will only give us a 50% chance, a coin toss, of meeting that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming goal. Now, you might notice that there are many reports coming out right now in advance of COP28, the next time we'll see world leaders meet to discuss the climate goals in Dubai. And so we're going to see many reports. We just saw one out last week talking about the health risks that come with 2 degrees Celsius warming. And again, we're on track for 3 right now. And I do also want to mention the report has highlighted how important it is that wealthy countries like Canada do reduce their emissions, because we have contributed the bulk of emissions. Even now, we are emitting more per capita than China and India combined. And if you look historically, it is going to be decades at current emissions rates for China and India to catch up to the amount the US and Canada have emitted.
And those emissions are shattering temperature records. June, July, August, September, and October were all the hottest on record. Present trends are racing our planet down a dead-end 3-degree temperature rise. In short, the report shows that the emissions gap is more like an emissions canyon. A canyon littered with broken promises, broken lives, and broken records.
Darius, as you say, this is an annual report. So how is this year's report different from what we've seen in the past?
Largely, it's because of the context around this report. Now, in this case, they had the benefit of having seen the destruction that we've seen the last few years, the records that we've seen smashed. And one climate scientist said this is a whisper of what's to come, and what is coming in the future will be a roar. Now, that seems dramatic, but take a look here. You can see that just this past weekend, for the first time, we saw a day in which the global temperatures exceeded 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels twice in a row. That is extremely alarming, especially when you consider how many days this past year have been above the 1.5 degrees warming limit. We can also take a look here. You can see the hottest 12 months on record were recorded from November 2022 to October 2023, still in a La Nina event. So with El Nino coming, those temperatures are expected to spike even more. Here you can see that around the world we've seen record-breaking temperatures for over 100 days in many places, including here on BC's coast. And including, even if we look right now, you can see that temperatures tomorrow expected to be breaking climate records. This is the Climate Shift Index published by Climate Central. If you take a look here, you can see that Brazil tomorrow expected to see temperatures made 5 times more likely as a result of climate change, as they have been for months now. And that's really illustrating what we've seen recently with these extreme heat events around the world, including just recently in Brazil. We've seen deaths as a result of the temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius for months now. It's just a taste of what's to come as a result of climate change. So the report really drove that point home as well.
Thanks, Darius. Okay, for more on this, we're joined by Caroline Brouillette. She is the Executive Director of Climate Action Network Canada. She's also attending COP28 this year, and we have reached her in Montreal. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Caroline, I fear that viewers will hear this latest statistics, this latest report, which is an annual report, and they'll feel like they've heard this before, that the target was set, we haven't reached it. It's so difficult. They'll hear the chorus of voices saying that it's too difficult to reach. Maybe it was too ambitious a target. For fear that that's what somebody out there is thinking when we say this, why should they care?
I won't lie, as a climate activist, it is definitely increasingly difficult to find something new to say to these reports showing that we're not on track, right? There's been a series of them recently, and it feels like report after report after report shows us this growing gap between what we're supposed to do to limit warming to safe levels and what we're actually doing. But what this report also tells us is that climate policy is working. Before the Paris Agreement, emissions were scheduled to rise by 16% by 2030, and now we're at 3%. They're still increasing, but we're starting to build the curve. Now what's truly needed is to tackle the elephant in the room and the reason why we haven't been able to limit emissions further, which is the growing emissions of the oil and gas sector.
So let's talk about that elephant in the room. You're saying that's the oil and gas sector. And that's what's keeping us from the 1.5 target and keeping us at this 3% mark?
Literally the only thing keeping us from reaching this crucial threshold of 1.5 degrees, above which if we might expose ourselves to the most catastrophic impacts of climate change, is the fact that there's an industry that has been holding us back and delaying and diluting policy, both at the international level and here in Canada. We do have an opportunity with a cap on oil and gas emissions that was promised by Prime Minister Trudeau at COP26 in Glasgow. However, we still haven't seen this policy being published forward. So we're really hoping to see it before COP28 so that Canada shows that it is doing its part of that effort to a just transition away from all fossil fuels, which will be a big topic of discussion at COP28.
Talk to me about COP28. It's going to be in Dubai. I think I remember so much attention being paid to Glasgow and all of the policies that were coming out of that. Do you feel that there will be that same level of attention around the world to what is going to come out of COP28, and what do you expect to come from that?
COP28 is an important COP because it forces the world to take a moment of reckoning through the global stocktake, which means that for the first time, the world will be taking a look at what we've accomplished so far at this gap that we've been talking about and that has been highlighted in so many reports, and what we're actually going to do about it. So because of that process, it is an important COP that the world's eyes will be on. I would also highlight that this big question around fossil fuels and the grip they've been having, not only on our imagination, but on our policy, will be at the center of the conversation as we're seeing growing momentum from across the world, 80 plus countries who are supporting this idea of a phase out away from unabated fossil fuels, hopefully all fossil fuels. And that's big because, believe it or not, it has never been discussed in a COP text. We've seen mentions of tackling fossil fuel subsidies or tackling coal, but what these reports have been telling us is that truly we need to tackle all fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal, and their grip on our policy.
Whenever I do these interviews, whenever I listen to interviews with experts like yourself, I, as an individual, am wondering what more am I supposed to be doing on an individual basis? And I suspect others who are watching are wondering that too. You say we've gone from what was going to be 16, we're now down to 3, which is arguably, I think, a reason to perhaps celebrate. But we need to get it down to 1.5. And I'm thinking, based on what you're saying, there's maybe not much more on an individual basis that can be done other than, are you talking to people about what they do at the ballot box, maybe, in terms of their next action toward climate change?
Just to kind of paint a clear picture of the challenge before us, I said that now emissions were increasing by 3% from now until 2030. If we want to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, we need to halve emissions to reduce them by 50% by 2030. And so the scale and the speed of the challenge before us, as you say, means that this is a political challenge. And being part of a democratic process means not only talking about climate climate action and flexing our climate muscles at the ballot box, but really making sure that our elected officials are aware that we care about this issue, that we're concerned about this issue day in and day out. And I would add that we are more powerful than the sum of our individual parts. And it's by joining others who are acting in your community, in your neighborhood, that we can build power large enough that it finally confronts the fossil fuels industry grasp on policy in Canada and beyond.
Caroline Brouillette, Executive Director of Climate Action Network Canada, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.